Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Everybody's Business. I'm Max Chafkin.
And I'm Stacey Vanek Smith. And this week, Max, once again, it has been dominated by news of the massive protests going on in Minneapolis. We've just seen tens of thousands of people taking to the streets, even in sub-zero temperatures, protesting the federal immigration crackdown by the city, and also some of the horrific consequences of it, including, of course, last week, the killing of Alex Petty.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all of that and then go inside the money behind this story with reporter Fola Akinnibi from Bloomberg, who's joining us to talk about it.
And after that, Max, you have a great conversation with reporter Sarah Frier about IVF and some of the startups cropping up to address what is being called a big population crisis in the world.
Underrated stories, Stacey. Industry, the show. Is it realistic? We're going to get into that. And we're going to talk about your favorite topic, which, of course, is precious metal.
I do really like precious metals. That's true. So, Max, of course, once again, this week we've seen massive protests in Minneapolis and elsewhere in the country related to ICE and the killing of Alex Petty by ICE agents. This week, though, there's been a pretty interesting tone shift from the administration after weeks of kind of holding the line. I know you follow politics really closely. I'm very curious what you think of what seems to be an inflection point from the administration, at least from the outside.
I think it's an inflection point in the administration and also maybe just a political inflection point. You know, watching someone get shot on a city street is upsetting, and it has helped make a thing that was already kind of politically dicey. You know, immigration was Trump's most popular issue going into his presidency. And I think there are a lot of people who are really behind the idea of securing the border and really upset about various aspects of kind of the Biden administration's approach to refugees. But the idea of sending these large masked groups into major American cities is not necessarily popular. It's also not necessarily popular, the idea of just sort of randomly plucking immigrants off the streets. That's a little bit different than kind of what Trump talked about. And so it does feel like, yes, a shift. I don't know how big a shift it is. Trump has replaced Gregory Bavino, who was kind of heading up this operation. He has been pushed aside. Tom Homan is in, and Trump is kind of deploying a new tone. He had been insulting Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Now he is talking about having productive conversations with Tim Walz. So there's a shift. Now, I don't know how big that shift is really going to be because this is sort of the thing that Trump ran on. So it's going to be a little tricky for him to totally walk away from this stuff. And I think that's going to create lots of tension going into the midterm. I mean,
from what I recall, the way that he ran on it, though, was much more about securing the border, which is quite different, I think, than, like you say, what we've been seeing in cities and the just increased aggression. Because before, although, you know, under Biden, ICE would make hundreds of thousands sometimes of arrests a year, there was a much different tenor, I think, to it. And I know that there was a huge emphasis on people who had committed crimes, not just on people who were undocumented in the country.
Yeah, and the other thing is, we've been talking about the economy most episodes and affordability and the K-shaped economy. Mm-hmm. And there are all these issues that are kind of looming over this. And so when you get this kind of pseudo-military operation and people don't feel like their lives are getting better, and we'll get to this with the conversation with Fola, this stuff is really expensive. Trump has been reminding everyone, especially at the beginning of his presidency, how limited the budget was, and we had to make all these cuts. Meanwhile, they're handing out, massive bonuses to these new ICE agents. And you're seeing this in the polling. You're also seeing this in kind of CEO reactions. There was a group of Minnesota-based companies that put out an open letter. It kind of reminded me of the Jerry Jones taking the knee at the Cowboys game during the height of BLM. It was a very I'd say like a kind of a mealy-mouthed, let's try to at least gesture at this. You're also seeing leaked statements from various executives, Tim Cook of Apple, Sam Altman of OpenAI, essentially not necessarily taking the side of the protesters, but clearly not taking Trump's side entirely.
That is, I think, an interesting idea that CEOs are now in a situation where they feel like they have to respond or they feel like a statement has to go out, which is pretty different than, say, during Trump's inauguration, where, a lot of the most important CEOs in the country, showed up on force to be there in the room on camera while Trump was getting inaugurated.
Yeah, and I want to say another thing that's making this pretty awkward is that while this was happening, many of them, including Apple's Tim Cook, were at a screening of the new Melania documentary on Amazon,
yes,
which is almost like the most extreme of the kind of public support from the Trump administration. Amazon famously paid something like $40 million to acquire the rights to this documentary, much of that going to Melania Trump. They've also spent like $35 million to put billboards everywhere, to put this in movie theaters. And I think the expectation is it's not going to be a huge commercial success, that this is just a gigantic amount of money to spend. So while this stuff is happening in Minnesota, you have Tim Cook and a bunch of other folks, a bunch of Amazon executives, posing with Brett Ratner, the director of the movie, at a special screening of the Melania movie. It looks, if you wanted to paint this administration as out of touch, I think you would have a very nice canvas there.
So, Max, as we've been talking about, the protests in Minneapolis have continued to pull in attention from all over the world. It has also drawn a lot of scrutiny of ICE itself, including money.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a potential government shutdown this weekend as we record on January 29th over this funding. And we have a great person to talk to about it.
Yes, we've got reporter Fola Akinnibi with Bloomberg City Lab. Fola, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been reporting quite extensively on ICE, the cost of detention. These costs have come up recently. They're pretty staggering. I guess during the Big Beautiful Bill, extra funding was allotted to ICE, totaling $175 billion from what I've read, which is larger than the annual allocation to any army in the world except for China and the U.S. What do you see as the significance of this funding?
So that money actually was for immigration enforcement writ large, right? And so it flows to agencies like ICE, like CBP, and other parts of DHS that do immigration enforcement. $170 billion is a lot of money. It's a huge amount of money. For context, between 1986 and 2013, the U.S. government spent like $180 billion on immigration.
In that whole time?
In that whole time, on immigration enforcement. And so now, the Trump administration has lavished these agencies with this much money over 4 years. And so it really changes what they are able to do. And I think we're seeing that play out in these cities across the U.S.
One of the things that I think has been so surprising to me in reading the coverage that Bloomberg has done, that you've been a part of, is just like the staggering costs of these individual operations. There was a good story that ran at the end of last year, basically talking about one person being detained costing on average, I believe, like $17,000. And that's partly because they're flying people from different detention centers. They're having to spin up these kind of temporary prisons. Who is administering this? Who's giving out the contracts to these private air travel companies, these prisons, and so on? And is there any kind of oversight over this process, or how's it working?
So I spoke to someone about this the other day and appreciated the way that they framed this, but this immigration enforcement project is not just an ideological project, right? If you want to do it in the way that this administration says it wants to do it, it's a huge logistical task. They say they want to deport 1 million people a year. And so to do that, famously, Stephen Miller says they need to be arresting 3,000 people a day. And then they would need, some estimates put it at 100,000 detention beds to have the space to then deport this many people. And if you look at what the administration is doing right now, even with all of this shock and awe in these cities across the U.S., they're only arresting about 1,300 people a day. And so you could sort of try to imagine what it would take to get to the number that Stephen Miller has requested, and you can see what they've already been doing over the past year.
Do we know where this money is being spent? I know like oversight over ICE was cut down quite significantly, but do we know where the $170 billion is going?
So one of the things we've been tracking closely is the spending on detention. There's about $45 billion in the big, beautiful bill for detention. And again, for context, historically, like on an annual basis, ICE has had like $3.5 billion a year for detention. When Trump won the election and when they're taking office, you could see already some of these like private prison operators that typically contract with the federal government, they're jumping for joy, right? Like they're on their earnings calls.
Yeah, some public company stocks went up on the day after the election. It was one of those Trump trades.
Yeah. They're like, this is great for business. And almost immediately, the administration begins expanding its capacity through these traditional channels. One of the things they quickly realize is that like they probably need more space than is available in all these jails and prisons across the U.S. They decide to start looking into like tent facilities. So there are these like sort of disaster relief companies that typically do like man camps for like oil
for
companies.
FEMA and things
for
like
FEMA,
that.
for hurricane relief. We had the snowstorm over the past week, so for things like that. So these are the companies, in many cases, they've never done detention, but these are companies that are being tapped to open up these facilities, like the one in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss, and the one in the Florida Everglades.
There's also a big push to build big new detention centers, including, I believe, one that's cost more than $1 billion and is, I believe, the biggest detention center will be in the country and beyond. One
of the first large-scale tent facility for immigration detention was in El Paso, Texas. This costs $1.2 billion to make. It's supposed to have a capacity of 5,000 people. Right now, there's like around 3,000 people there. And it is the largest immigration detention facility in the U.S. The administration has since pivoted again, and they've put out a plan to use like e-commerce style warehouses to detain people. And it still like sort of remains unclear how they're going to convert these warehouses, which are like essentially massive blank warehouses, into detention centers. But that seems to be the next sort of iteration of this plan.
What are the other types of companies that are profiting in this kind of spending frenzy? You talked about the prison companies. What else is happening? Where else is money being spent?
So we're seeing on the detention side of things, we're seeing like these security companies. They're like food service providers. They're these tent companies. And then you have on the enforcement side of things, you have some of these technology companies that do like surveillance tech that are making money. Weapon suppliers
and the like.
Yeah. Weapon suppliers, folks that make like the OC sprays that you see in some of these actions.
This is like pepper spray.
Pepper spray. We've even seen contracts coming through for like winter coats as they're in like the Twin Cities where it's been quite cold. And so it runs the gamut.
There's a lot of scrutiny right now on ICE and on some of the costs of ICE. Do you see this as being an inflection point? Do you think there will be more questions asked into funding, or do you think this money is allocated and it's just gonna keep going to detention centers and to ICE?
It's a tough question, and I think it remains to be seen. I think congressional Democrats are now seemingly asking more questions about using this funding as leverage, but even on the precipice of a shutdown or with a shutdown, these agencies still have the $170 billion that was allocated to them last year. And so even if they block the appropriation, that doesn't block the other large pool of money. And so it's not clear how they would navigate that. And I want to notice that with that pool of money from the Big Beautiful Bill, I've talked to sources about this, and there's not a lot of restrictions on how that money is supposed to be spent in the way that there are like when Congress appropriates money, right? Like when Congress appropriates money, they do it very specifically. Like and the language is in the Big Beautiful Bill. It just says like $45 billion for detention. It doesn't really explain how.
That's like not a normal thing.
That's not normal. Like the language is very vague, and it allows a lot of flexibility to whoever is deciding how this money will be spent.
Fola, you brought up that to get to the numbers that Stephen Miller has talked about, that Trump has talked about, they would have to go way further than they're going now. As much as what they're doing now is creating all sorts of strains in terms of strains on civic life in Minneapolis, political strains for the Trump administration. A lot of this stuff is not looking super popular. And also just strains in terms of detention capacity. So what's the plan? Like, how do they propose to even increase from where they are today?
They've touted self-deportation. They converted the CBP One app, which was used under the Biden administration, to give people appointments to come to the border to try to bring order to the process at the border. They've converted into the CBP Home app, which is supposed to facilitate people's, repatriation, their departure from the country. The administration has said 1.6 million people left last year. I'm not sure what their timetable is on that, but they said 1.6 million people have departed. That number has been disputed. ProPublica had some reporting about the Home app, and that I think they reported that 25,000 people had taken advantage of that, and another 30-something thousand people had gone home under a voluntary departure, which is a lot. And when you consider recent history, it's a lot of people, but it's not anywhere near the numbers that they're proposing.
Yeah, I mean, they're touting these, quote, self-deportation bonus or stipends or whatever between, I think, as much as $3,000 or about $3,000. And you actually see these signs in the airport. I don't know if either of you have seen them, but there are signs saying, CPB will pay you some amount of money to leave the United States. And this looks preferable by comparison, which seems like a pretty rough way to induce people. I mean, I think it's more about the unpleasantness than the bonus.
I mean, I think that this is just another sign of how much money these agencies have at their disposal, right? Again, it's not clear to me that these programs are being used by folks en masse. There's been reporting in other outlets about how folks who even do try to use these programs or don't receive the money are not eligible for the money. It's not clear, in some cases, who is eligible, who's not eligible. The money is being sent to people who are not leaving or to other people. And so it's not clear to me what some of these programs are for, how they are working, and whether or not they're successful.
It's been a little bit since the big, beautiful bill was passed and since this money came into immigration enforcement in the U.S. How have you, and you've been watching it for a while now, how have you seen immigration enforcement and detention evolve, since then? How have you seen it evolve with this sort of influx of resources?
I think, these scenes playing on the street are, again, indicative of how this administration wants to approach this. And I guess in some respects, they show what needs to happen in order to achieve what they want to achieve. Traditionally, CBP has operated near the border, and their operations typically, as they've been described to me, they do include roving patrols, but it's different when you're roving in the desert and you're seeing one or two people and they're sort of given leeway to profile in that way. These agents have been brought into urban centers, and if you're applying those tactics in an urban center, obviously there are citizens, there are folks who are legally here, and there are folks who maybe wouldn't react kindly to being stopped or to being approached in that way. But I guess to bring it back, I think that in order to achieve these numbers, they need to be stopping a lot of people. They need to be finding people in their homes. They need to be finding people in their workplaces, and they need to be incredibly aggressive to achieve these goals.
Fola, thank you so much for joining us. We did want to ask you to stick around and come back at the end of the show. We do our underrated stories, and so we'd love to have you come back.
Sure, I'll come back.
So, Max, before we get to our underrated stories, you had a really fascinating conversation with reporter Sarah Frier about another issue that's been talked about a lot lately, which is population.
Yeah, the Census Bureau was out earlier this week with a population estimate showing a decline in the U.S. population, partly because of immigration, but also because of lowering birth rates. And we've talked about this issue of birth rates on the podcast before.
I mean, it's definitely a conversation.
People are having fewer babies.
They are.
And, anytime there is a problem, there are going to be a bunch of Silicon Valley startups offering a sort of technology answer. And Sarah Frier, who is a reporter here at Bloomberg, as well as an editor who runs our big tech coverage, she also showed up all the time on the Elon Inc. podcast in the old days. She did a deep dive on this company called Conceivable and on the issue of sort of tech-enabled IVF, in vitro fertilization, and tech in all of these areas of medicine where it really hasn't made much of an appearance yet.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. And Max, here it is.
Sarah Frier, welcome to Everybody's Business.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so how did you get interested in this? I mean, you're covering all of the ways that various venture capitalists and very smart people in the tech industry are trying to apply AI to everything. Why this problem?
So, yeah, you're right. I spend my days thinking about big tech, and it's just investment after investment in data centers and talent and the next greatest model, all of that with this promise of this future that is going to look really different and that we are all going to benefit from in some big life-changing way. So I met with this company and I just kind of was curious. And what really stuck out to me is they were talking about applying some of the lessons from big tech, like chip manufacturing, lessons from self-driving car technology, using that and applying it to the smallest possible surgery that we do. So like single cell surgery, putting a sperm into an egg to create a human. And then I met this venture capitalist who was invested and on the board of this company who was going to have a child using this robotic IVF lab, the first automated lab to create humans.
You got to talk about what exactly they're doing because, and people should read the article. You can see the pictures of, I mean, it does kind of look like science fiction, but it's really fascinating, like how this machine works.
Yeah, so what it does, it just uses the same precise robotic arms that are used in manufacturing at SpaceX, at Meta, to create tiny components for machines. And it's using those to move the pipettes and petri dishes that are needed in this procedure. And it's picking out the eggs that are mature enough to use. It's picking out the sperm out of semen.
You have to get the sperm, you got to centrifuge the semen, then you have to stun the sperm so they stop moving. Then they have to pick, am I getting this wrong? Then they have to pick up a single sperm cell, which sounds hard, and then stick that single sperm cell into another single cell. You describe it as surgery on the cellular level. It's an incredibly precise thing. And when you think about the fact that this is done by humans in labs every day with at least some success. I mean, it's amazing this works at all, let alone it might work with robots.
This is an industry that has only really existed for about 40 or 50 years, and it's still very manual. The tech that has happened to change, blood testing and genetic sequencing, all of that, has not really crossed into fertility in a major way. This very repetitive process that embryologists do, finding the sperm, finding the egg, joining them together, plunging the embryo into liquid nitrogen to freeze it, all of those steps can be done in an automated way. And they've proven it. Like, babies have been born, 19 babies at this point, including the baby from the venture capitalist who ended up on the board.
I mean, one of my big complaints covering this world a lot is I feel like we tend to, and especially Silicon Valley technologists tend to kind of underappreciate human labor, which is part of the reason I was like, it's amazing that this worked. Like these surgeons, they're not surgeons, but what is the field that the people who do the sperm and the egg in the lab, what is that called?
The reproductive endocrinologists. They are doctors, yeah. And then the embryologists are the lab workers. On the one hand, it is at least more measurable. You can see what's happening at every step of the process. You know exactly how far into the egg the needle went to deposit the sperm. You know exactly what speed the embryo was plunged into its cooling solution. All of that can be measured in a way that we haven't done before. And then using that data, we can figure out what's working, what's not working. There's a lot of variables to track and check. That said, this is biological material, right? There are other processes that we experience in our everyday lives that are repetitive that we wouldn't necessarily give to a robot to do. Like sometimes the cell wall of the egg is a little thicker, or sometimes the egg sticks to the inside of the pipette when you're trying to move it. So there is some improvisation. For the most part, it's very repetitive, but they say they won't bring this to market unless it's much better than the best human embryologist. And also they plan to go to market this year. So they seem confident in the data. The early data from the company is that they achieve a 51% overall blastocyst rate, which means like the blastocysts that can be implanted into a body and then potentially grow into a baby.
And 51%, and that is from their early data, right? They're still doing a clinical trial. This is not like peer-reviewed data.
That's data from the prototype round.
And like the human embryologist in their clinic gets about, according to them, gets about a 50% rate as well. So it's sort of like matching the human performance.
But these are also, the founders of this company are really good at storytelling and sales. And I think, whenever you come across something like this, you need to have good storytellers in order to connect with people. And that's something that was so interesting to me too about this story, is it really was like a humans and robots story. Like what do the robots need from the humans in order to succeed? What can't the robots do that the humans can? And it really became like an adventure for me as a reporter, like a life and death situation for a couple of the people involved in the piece. I'm not going to totally give it away, but it's really striking, like when we bring automation into a process as critical as creating new human life, how much emotion is still tied into that life cycle.
Can you talk about you spent a lot of time with Camilla Herman, who's one of the patients. Can you talk about her decision and the decision that she and her partner made to do this?
So Camilla Herman is the wife of Ika Ho, who is a venture capitalist at Acme, who was invested in this company. And Ika saw the progress from conceivable and thought, if this aligns with my family's timeline to have a baby, I'd love to try it. And her wife said, hold on, like, what are we doing here? Are we building a family, or are we like doing diligence on one of your companies? But she got on board. And I think that could have gone either way.
There's a commitment to the narrative here that you got to appreciate, right? You really believe in the promise of these AI systems enough to not only to sign up for one, but to sign up for a clinical trial where I don't think we know how this is going to go, really.
They have a healthy baby now.
How would this make things cheaper? Is there even any way this would actually make things cheaper? Or is this just like Silicon Valley figuring out a way to kind of turn an offline industry into an online one? And how might this make it cheaper?
Well, what could make it cheaper is just the nature of the labor to create the embryos. Instead of having embryologists in a lab who can make maybe 300 per day, you could have an embryologist and a couple technicians in like a warehouse of these robotic labs, and just each lab able to churn out thousands a day, and it could work 24 hours a day. Robots, in theory, don't get tired.
Got it.
So that's a whole ordeal as well. The drugs you have to take, the expense of those drugs. And this is kind of the final step of actually making an embryo, assuming you've collected enough healthy eggs and sperm to do so.
Do you buy that there's like a policy argument here in favor of this? Like, there are people during our end of the year special, Robert Smith spoke about declining birth rates worldwide. What do you think about this as a kind of like policy response to some of the economic challenges?
It's so interesting because there are a lot of ways to increase the paying working people in a society, including immigration, and the same government that wants to reduce immigration is really interested in increasing the birth rate. I think it can be a way to address, but of course there's a time scale, right? Babies who are born today are going to be part of the tax base maybe 20 years from now. So it takes a while.
But there are some difficult ethical questions raised by the idea of robots operating at mass scale, deciding which embryos to implant. Like, are we worried about that?
Actually did talk to a bunch of ethicists for the story. And it's really interesting because if it's more effective in terms of IVF, there's an ethical argument to do it, because then you have a higher chance of succeeding for that couple, that this is their only chance. That said, when we give over something so basic to the human race as the propagation of the species, and we don't know exactly how it works, that is what scares people. If you have a situation where the robot, with the help of AI, starts iterating, getting better at doing what it does, to the point that they're using so many variables that humans don't quite understand or haven't quite measured, they may focus on the wrong variables, or they may make a decision that isn't quite right, and then an error might be repeated across many, many cycles as opposed to just one. Like if a human embryologist drops a petri dish, that affects one patient and maybe happens rarely. If a robotic system makes an error, that is probably just part of the procedure that could get repeated because it's software.
Can't wait.
I think we'll just have
number 4. Here I come. Sarah, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Stacey, it's that time for Underrated Stories. Fola's back with us right now. Hey, Fola.
Hey.
All right, so which is good.
He does not know what he's in for, by the way.
But Fola is familiar, I believe, with my underrated story, which is Stacey, industry.
The TV show.
The TV
it's a great show.
Industry. It is back on. I wanted to bring it up because it's very much in our wheelhouse, both of our wheelhouse of Everybody's Business and Bloomberg, where we work. It is a show about finance in London. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of hijinks.
But it takes place inside of like an investment firm. Like the main characters are all involved in trading and selling trading products and all that stuff.
I have never been the biggest fan of the show. I find it kind of dark and have had trouble getting into it. But Fola, you've been watching the latest season. What's your thoughts so far?
I'm a big fan of the show. It is really dark, but I feel like it's kind of like a fast moving show, and I like that energy.
I also like it because I feel like it's things we read about all the time, especially at Bloomberg, and we focus on markets and things like that. So it's a lot of issues that come up all the time. Like one of the early trades early on in the show, the main character suggests is shorting America, which I thought was really fun. I feel like I do learn some things, although I'm not 1,000% sure it's accurate. I do really enjoy the show.
So on the question of realism, Charlie Gorvin, our reporter, he was in London last week, Stacey, and we thought it'd be fun to send Charlie out onto the streets to sort of meet some young bankers and get their review of industry.
I'm so curious.
And here's what they said.
Yeah, tell me, are you a fan of industry?
Yes, I am. And whether or not the industry's day-to-day is the same as real life, it does a good job of showing the pressures and the stresses of being a young professional in London.
What they're representing is what the city, I guess, used to be before any of our time.
What is attracting to it is just real. Well, it's not real, but it's a realistic interpretation of what banking is.
I think there's a lot of shows that have talked about finance and making money fast. For me personally, I'm a bit of a nerd about how do they actually do it. It's a big industry with a lot of different business types. And prop trading, I think, didn't have as much representation, especially in TV shows. So I think that was cool. As someone who worked in an adjacent industry, I think it was fascinating showing you have the potential to make a lot of money in a short amount of time without having to deal with managing labor and how the effect that it had on people. So you're saying that you think the show's realistic, from at least as far as you can tell? Yeah, it's like people they're searching for alpha, and it's stressful, but you're like always one step away or from like a fortune.
Searching for alpha. Amazing.
Representation of prop trading in media. We have come a
Seeking
long
alpha.
way. We've done it, guys.
They feel seen.
I have to say, I'm so interested to hear these bankers say that they feel like it's realistic, because one of the things that is very noticeable about the show that I notice when I watch it is I get really stressed out because it is just the pressure and the money. And I mean, it's hard to watch. Like, I have to take breaks because I get so anxious.
I'm just saying, I think The Pitt's better, but
Is that also a stressful show?
it's also very.
It's
like the
stressful.
opposite, though.
It's more gross, though.
It's more
There's
gross.
a lot of gross out.
All right.
What does it say that all these stressful shows are so popular?
I think we're displacing our anxiety, don't you? This is why, during scary times, people like monster movies. It's just you've got to do something with all those feelings, and it's better to watch someone on TV losing a fake $150,000 than watch the news.
Well, now this season they're losing $150 million, right? Like the stakes are way bigger.
Stacey, what was your underrated story?
Okay, this is super nerdy. So everyone settle in to talk about the price of silver. Now I know.
Fola, you don't know this, but Stacey's like always trying to get us to talk about
Really
the price
like
of
the price of
various
gold.
precious minerals.
It's only gold. Gold has been on a huge tear, and it's because people see it as a safe place to put money. When the world's foundations are shaking, gold is a centuries-old safe place to put your money. Safe-ish.
Why silver?
Silver has never had the same status. Nobody really invests in silver. It's kind of like a poor man's gold, but like really, really, like it's not a safe haven the same way gold is.
Is this like when Bitcoin goes up, all these other stupid currencies also
it
go
would be
up,
a meme
basically?
coin. It would be a meme coin, yes.
Got
to
it.
gold's like Bitcoin. Silver would be not even a Dogecoin. We're talking like a, I don't know, like a fart coin or something. Like maybe not quite a fart coin. Maybe...
I think it's more like Ethereum or something.
No, it's definitely not Ethereum.
Okay.
I would say Dogecoin. Maybe Dogecoin.
Okay.
Anyway, now silver is on this crazy tear. It's over $120 an ounce, and it's going up quite significantly. And the reason that I think that this is a really underrated story is I think the U.S. U.S. Treasury bonds have been the safe place to put the world's money for decades and decades. It was just the safe, boring, solid investment. And now that I think the U.S. is maybe looking like a little less safe of an investment, a little more erratic, I mean, U.S. Treasury bonds are the largest market in the world. Governments, investment houses, everybody puts their money there. I think there's a lot of money with nowhere to go. I think that's why gold is going up. I think that's why silver is going up. Silver also, its industrial uses are on the rise. But I think this is a sign that everybody is like starting to get really nervous.
As we're having this conversation, I'm just getting so nervous about what the end of the kind of like number go up era of investing is going to look like when all of these silver and all of these kind of meme stock adjacent things start to go down in price. And you have all these retail investors who have taken their money out of much safer assets and put them into weird derivatives and silver and bets on Polymarket. And I'm getting anxious just thinking about it.
I don't know. Fola, are you like an investor? Do you? No, not so much.
Not at all. Like
Polymarket or anything?
No.
He's a Bloomberg reporter. He's not allowed to be
but
gambling
even if I was, I wouldn't be gambling. I really like. I think the pervasiveness of gambling, like really, and I'm not a Puritan, but like it's kind of gross. I'm a big sports guy, and I just feel like betting has just like crept into it. It raises questions about like every action in the game, and then like people are like, well, like this guy, like he was taking a knee in the game, and he took an extra step because he's trying to watch the bettors, and
it ruins it.
It ruins it.
The show is produced by Stacey Wong and Jasmine J.T. Green. Magnus Henriksen is our supervising producer. Sam Rogich handles engineering, and Dave Purcell fact checks. A special thanks to Jeff Muskus, Julia Rubin, Charlie Gorovin, and Maria Ling. If you have a minute, please rate and review the show. It really means a lot to us. And very importantly, if you have a story that should be our business, please send us an email. We will make it our business too. That is everybody's@bloomberg.net. That's everybody's with an S at bloomberg.net. And thank you for listening. We will see you next week.